My mom never told me she loved me. Not once in my entire life. And yet, when everything finally collapsed, when her world fell apart in a way no one could fix, I was the one she called. Not my brother. Not the child she sacrificed everything for. Me. I still remember the sound of her voice on the phone that night. Weak, careful, almost unfamiliar. She said my name like she was afraid I wouldn't answer. And for a moment, I just stood there, staring at the wall, asking myself a question I never thought I'd face. Why now? Because for decades, my mother made it clear who mattered and who didn't. She chose my brother every single time. Time, her money, her protection, her love, and I paid the price for that choice. Quietly, legally, emotionally, in ways no one ever knew. What she never realized was this. The biggest mistake of her life wasn't trusting the wrong child. It was pushing the right one to the edge and assuming I'd still be there when she needed saving. This story isn't about revenge. It's about consequences, about favoritism that destroys families from the inside, and about the kind of pain that doesn't scream, it waits. Before we go any further, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one who carried the weight while someone else took the credit, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that your pain matters and that truth always comes back around, even if it takes years. So let me ask you something. What would you do if the person who broke you showed up at your door one day asking for help? Would you walk away? Would you finally say no? Or would you do the one thing they never deserved, just to free yourself? Because what happened next in my story, what my mother did years ago that I only uncovered much later, is something no one ever expects. And by the time you understand why I was the one who paid for her biggest mistake, you might see your own family differently too. This is my story, and it starts long before that phone call, back when I first learned what it meant to be unloved by the person who was supposed to protect me most. Growing up, I didn't know the word favoritism. I just knew how it felt. It felt like sitting at the kitchen table, doing my homework alone, while my mom sat beside my brother, correcting his answers, praising his effort, telling him how smart he was. It felt like hearing my name only when something went wrong, and hearing his name whenever something went right. In our house, love wasn't loud. It wasn't warm. It was selective. My brother was older than me by 3 years. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. 2 kids, 1 mom, a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. But inside that house, there was a clear line drawn, and I was always standing on the wrong side of it. If my brother forgot to do his chores, my mom would sigh and say he was tired. If I forgot, she'd say I was careless, ungrateful, lazy. If he needed new shoes, she found the money. If I did, she told me to wait until next month. I learned early not to ask for much. Not because I didn't want things, but because I already knew the answer. The strange part was my mother never hid it. She didn't pretend to treat us the same. She didn't even seem ashamed. Once, when I was about 10, I asked her why she always took my brother's side. I didn't accuse her. I didn't yell. I just asked. She didn't hesitate. She said he needs me more. That sentence stayed with me for years, because somehow it made my pain feel unreasonable, like I wasn't allowed to hurt because someone else mattered more. As we got older, the gap only widened. My brother played sports. My mom never missed a game. Rain or shine, she was there, cheering from the sidelines, talking to other parents about his future. I worked part-time after school. No one asked how my shift went. No one asked if I was tired. When it came time for birthdays, the difference was impossible to ignore. For my brother, there were parties, friends, gifts he actually wanted. For me, there was a cake from the grocery store and a quick, distracted happy birthday before my mom went back to whatever she was doing. One year, she forgot entirely. She remembered 2 days later. She said, "You know, I've had a lot on my mind." I nodded. I always nodded. By the time I was a teenager, I stopped expecting fairness. I told myself this was just how families were, that love didn't always look the same. But deep down, I felt something heavier growing inside me. Not anger, not yet. It was the feeling of being unseen, of realizing that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how responsible I was, I would never be the one she chose first. The worst part wasn't the lack of affection. It was the responsibility she placed on me. I was the reliable one, the one who could handle things, the one who didn't need much. Whenever something went wrong, she looked at me and said, "You understand, right?" And I did. Or at least I convinced myself I did. Looking back now, I realized something that took me decades to accept. My mother knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't neglect by accident. It wasn't stress. It wasn't confusion. She had decided long before I could form my own opinions which child mattered more. And she built our entire family around that decision. At the time, I didn't know that this was only the beginning, that one day her favoritism wouldn't just hurt my feelings, it would cost me everything, because the same pattern that shaped my childhood would later shape a decision that changed my life forever. And when that moment came, my mother wouldn't hesitate. The first time my mother asked me to sign something, she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile people use when they already know the answer they want. By then, my brother was in his early 20s. He had big plans, big ideas. At least, that's what my mother kept telling everyone. "He's going to make it," she'd say. "He just needs one real chance." That chance apparently was going to cost more than we had. My mother came to me one evening after dinner. The house was quiet. My brother wasn't home. She sat across from me at the table and placed a thin folder between us. "I need your help," she said. Those words caught my attention. She rarely needed anything from me, at least not directly. She explained that my brother was starting something new, a business, a partnership. She said it was an opportunity that wouldn't come again. "We just need a little support on paper," she added quickly. "Nothing will actually fall on you." I asked her what she meant by that. She flipped open the folder and pointed to a few pages. Legal language, small print. Words I didn't fully understand at the time. "It's just a formality," she said. "They need a co-signer, someone stable, someone responsible." Then she looked at me. I remember feeling a strange mix of pride and unease. For once, she was acknowledging something about me, that I was dependable, that I mattered in some way. I asked where my brother was in all this. She waved her hand dismissively. "He's busy handling the real work. This part is simple." I hesitated, not because I didn't trust her, but because something about the urgency felt off. She noticed. Her tone changed. "This is for the family," she said. "And you're part of this family, aren't you?" That question didn't feel like a question. It felt like pressure. I asked if there were any risks. She shook her head immediately. "I wouldn't put you in danger," she said. "I promise." That was the moment I should have stopped. That was the moment I should have asked for time, or advice, or said no. But years of conditioning spoke louder than my instincts. I signed, not all at once, page after page. My name at the bottom of promises I didn't fully grasp. My mother gathered the papers and stood up quickly, like she was afraid I might change my mind. "You did the right thing," she said. "I knew I could count on you." She hugged me, briefly, awkwardly. It was the first hug I could remember in a long time. For a while after that, nothing happened. Life went on. My brother talked about his future constantly. New contacts, new deals, new plans. My mother glowed with pride, and I went back to my routine. Work, bills, responsibility, until the letters started arriving. At first I thought they were mistakes. Notices, statements, requests for information. I brought one to my mother, confused. She barely glanced at it. "Don't worry," she said. "These things take time to process." Then she handed it back to me. "You handle it. You're good with this kind of stuff." That was when the weight shifted. Quietly, almost invisibly, phone calls started coming too. Voicemails I didn't understand. Questions I didn't know how to answer. When I asked my brother about it, he laughed. "You stress too much," he said. "Mom said you've got it under control." I didn't, but I didn't argue either, because somewhere deep inside me, a familiar feeling had returned. The feeling that my role wasn't to ask questions, it was to carry the load. What I didn't know then, what my mother never bothered to explain, was that the papers I signed didn't make me a helper. They made me responsible, legally, financially, completely. That was her first real mistake, not choosing my brother. She had done that my whole life. Her mistake was believing I would never find out what that choice would eventually cost me. And by the time I did, it was already too late to undo it. From the outside, my brother looked like a success story. New car, nice clothes, confident smile. The kind of person my mother loved to talk about. She mentioned his name in conversations with neighbors, relatives, even strangers at the grocery store. "My son is doing so well," she'd say. "He's building something big." Every time she said it, she looked proud, relieved, like all her choices had finally been proven right. What she never mentioned was who was quietly holding everything together. Behind the scenes, my life was shrinking. Bills started stacking up. My credit score dipped. I took extra shifts, then another job on weekends. When I came home exhausted, there was no applause, no concern, just the unspoken expectation that I would manage, because that was my role, the responsible one, the stable one, the one who didn't need help. Meanwhile, my brother talked about risk like it was exciting, like it was a game. "Big returns require big moves," he'd say, leaning back comfortably. And my mother nodded along, as if risk only applied to people like me. One afternoon, I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. My mother was on the phone in the living room. I was in the hallway, about to leave for work, when I heard my name. She lowered her voice. "Yes," she said. "They're all in his name. He's safe." There was a pause. "No, the responsibility is covered." I made sure of that. My stomach tightened. I waited until she hung up and asked who she was talking to. She looked startled, then annoyed. "It's nothing you need to worry about," she said. That answer didn't sit right with me. Later that week, I finally confronted my brother. Not aggressively, just honestly. I asked him if he knew what I had signed, if he understood what my name was attached to. He didn't look surprised. He laughed. "You always overthink things," he said. "Mom said you're fine with it." That was the moment something shifted inside me, because his tone wasn't ignorant. It wasn't confused. It was casual, like he knew exactly what was happening and had decided it wasn't his problem. I pressed him, asked him directly if my name was protecting his. He shrugged. "That's just how it worked out," he said. "Someone had to be the safe option. Someone. Not brother, not family. Someone." I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I replayed years of moments in my head. Every time my mother told me I was strong. Every time she said I didn't need much. Every time she trusted me with responsibility, but never with joy. It finally made sense. My brother wasn't just the favorite. He was the investment, and I was the insurance. As long as things went well, he got the praise. If things went wrong, I would absorb the damage. Quietly, without complaint. When I tried to bring this up with my mother, she shut it down immediately. "You're being dramatic," she said. "This is temporary." I asked her why my brother wasn't listed on the documents the way I was. She avoided my eyes. "You're more reliable," she said. And reliability matters. That word again, reliable. Like it was a compliment. Like it excused everything. From that point on, I saw the pattern everywhere. My brother took risks because he could. My mother protected him because she wanted to. And I paid because no one thought to ask if I could afford to. Still, I stayed quiet because deep down, I hoped that one day all of this would mean something. That one day my mother would look at me and say she saw me. What I didn't know was that the foundation she had built around my brother was already starting to crack. And when it did, it wouldn't be him standing under the weight. It would be me. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started quietly. A denied loan, a warning at work, a letter that said, "Final notice" in bold letters. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that I just needed to hold on a little longer. But holding on takes energy, and mine was running out. The pressure followed me everywhere. To work, home, even into my sleep. I started waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, replaying conversations that hadn't even happened yet. What would I say if someone asked questions I couldn't answer? What would I do if the truth finally caught up with me? At work, my performance slipped. I missed deadlines. I made mistakes I'd never made before. One afternoon, my manager called me into his office. He didn't raise his voice. That was the worst part. He said the company was restructuring. He said they needed people who were fully focused. I nodded even though my ears were ringing. When I walked out of that building for the last time, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt empty. Losing my job triggered everything else. The bills didn't stop. The calls didn't slow down. And the stress started to seep into my marriage. I became distant, short-tempered, always distracted. My partner tried to understand at first, asked what was wrong, offered help. But how do you explain something that feels too embarrassing to say out loud? Eventually, the silence between us grew heavier than any argument. One night after another tense dinner, my partner asked me a question I couldn't avoid. "Are we going to be okay?" I didn't know how to answer. A few weeks later, they packed a bag and left to stay with family. They said they needed space. What they really needed was a version of me that wasn't constantly breaking down. That was the moment I realized I couldn't do this alone anymore. So I did the one thing I had never done before. I asked my mother for help. I went to her house and sat across from her at the same table where I had signed those papers years ago. My hands were shaking. I told her everything. The job, the debt, the strain on my marriage. I didn't blame her. I didn't accuse. I just said I couldn't carry it anymore. She listened quietly. No interruptions. No questions. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she sighed. Not in concern, in irritation. She said, "This is really bad timing." I asked her what she meant. She explained that my brother was dealing with a lot right now, that he was under pressure, that he didn't need extra stress. I stared at her, waiting for the part where she talked about me. It never came. I asked if she could help me financially, just temporarily, just enough to get through the worst of it. She shook her head. "I can't," she said. "It wouldn't be fair to him." Fair. That word landed harder than anything else she could have said. I asked her if she remembered promising she wouldn't put me in danger. She waved her hand. "You're strong," she said. "You'll figure it out." Then she stood up, signaling the conversation was over. As I walked out of her house, something inside me finally cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet realization settling deep in my chest. I was alone in this. Not because no one could help me, but because the one person who should have chosen me never would. That night, sitting in an empty apartment, I understood something I had avoided my entire life. My mother didn't just favor my brother. She had built her entire sense of safety around him. and built her entire sense of responsibility around me. And when I finally collapsed under the weight she gave me, she chose to protect him again. That was when I stopped hoping she would ever change. What I didn't know then was that the very decision she made that day would soon come back to her in ways she never imagined. For a long time, it felt like nothing would ever change. My brother kept moving forward, and I kept sinking. But life has a way of waiting until people feel untouchable before it pulls the ground out from under them. The first sign came in a way no one talked about openly. My mother stopped bragging. She still mentioned my brother, but the tone was different, shorter, less certain. When I asked how he was doing, she brushed it off. "He's busy," she said. "You know how these things go." Then one afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was someone asking questions. Too many questions. They wanted to know where my brother was. They wanted to confirm details about businesses I had never seen, about money I had never touched. When I told them I didn't know, the silence on the other end of the line felt heavy. "You're listed as responsible," the voice finally said. That sentence sent a chill through me. I confronted my mother again. This time, she didn't deny that something was wrong. She just minimized it. "These things happen," she said. "People overreact." I asked her if my brother was in trouble. She hesitated. "Just long enough." "He's sorting it out," she said. But he wasn't. Within weeks, the rumors became impossible to ignore. Partners backed out. Accounts were frozen. People started demanding answers. And my brother disappeared. Not all at once. At first, he just stopped returning calls. Then, he stopped coming by. Then, his phone went straight to voicemail. My mother tried to act calm. She said he needed space, that he was dealing with stress. But I could see the fear in her eyes, because for the first time, the person she had built everything around was slipping out of her control. The real turning point came when strangers started showing up at her door. Men in suits, serious expressions, no patience. They asked for my brother. Then they asked for me. That was when the truth finally started to surface. The business wasn't just failing. It had been built on lies, false promises, missing money. And the safety net my mother believed she had created was never meant to protect me. It was meant to protect him. My brother left behind a trail of damage he had no intention of fixing. And with each step he took away from it, the weight shifted further onto my shoulders. My mother called him endlessly, left messages that went unanswered. Her voice changed during those days. The confidence disappeared. The certainty dissolved. One evening, she sat across from me, staring at the table. "He wouldn't do this to me," she said quietly. I didn't know how to respond, because I realized something she couldn't yet accept. He didn't do it to her. He did it knowing she would never hold him accountable, knowing someone else would take the fall. That someone was me. When I told her this, she snapped. "You don't know that," she said sharply. "He's not a bad person." I asked her where he was. She didn't answer. Days turned into weeks, then months. And slowly, painfully, my mother began to understand what I had known all along. The child she trusted blindly had chosen himself. The consequences she thought she had shielded him from were circling back. But karma doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in. And by the time my mother realized that everything she had built was starting to collapse, it was already too late to stop it, because my brother wasn't just gone. He had left her behind, with nothing but questions and a future she was completely unprepared to face. The house didn't feel the same once my brother was gone. It wasn't empty, but it felt hollow. My mother stopped answering the phone the way she used to. Her voice lost its sharpness. Her movements slowed. The people who once praised her son stopped calling. The neighbors who used to smile and ask questions suddenly avoided eye contact. And slowly, the truth settled in. She was alone. The financial pressure didn't disappear with my brother. It grew. The bills that had been hidden for years surfaced one by one. Late notices, warnings, deadlines she didn't know how to meet. She tried to manage it at first, sold a few things, cut expenses, pretended everything was under control. But pretending only works for so long. The day she told me she was selling the house, her voice trembled. "This is temporary," she said, "just until things calm down." That house had been her pride. The place she believed proved she had done everything right. Watching her let it go felt unreal. She moved in with a distant relative. A small room. Rules she wasn't used to following. For the first time in her life, she had to ask permission. That change broke something in her. She grew quiet, defensive, and still, she didn't apologize. Weeks passed without a word between us. Then one evening, my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a long time before answering. When I finally did, her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't acknowledge the past. She said, "I need your help." Those words landed heavily. I waited for her to say more. She explained that her health wasn't good, that the stress had taken a toll, that she didn't know where else to turn. There was no apology in her voice, no regret, just expectation. She assumed I would step in, the same way I always had. I asked her where my brother was. There was a long silence. "I don't know," she said finally. That was the first honest thing she had said in a long time. I told her I needed time to think. She sounded surprised, almost offended, as if my hesitation was unreasonable. After the call ended, I sat alone replaying her words. She hadn't called to make things right. She hadn't called to say she was sorry. She called because she had run out of options. And that realization hurt more than anything she had ever done. Days later, I visited her. She looked smaller, older. The woman who once controlled every room she entered now struggled to stand. She talked about her pain, her fear, her uncertainty, but she never talked about mine. At one point, she said something that made everything clear. "I never thought it would end like this." I looked at her and realized neither had I. Because all those years, she believed she had planned everything perfectly, that she had protected the child who mattered. She never imagined she would be the one left unprotected. And still, even then, she didn't see it as a consequence. She saw it as bad luck. What she didn't understand was this. This wasn't misfortune. It was the result of every choice she had made. And now the person she had overlooked her entire life was standing in front of her, deciding whether to walk away or step back into a role that had nearly destroyed me once before. I didn't uncover the truth all at once. It came back to me in pieces, fragments I had ignored for years, because I didn't want to see what they meant. After my mother's call, something inside me refused to stay quiet. For the first time, I wasn't focused on surviving. I was focused on understanding. I went back to the documents, the ones I had shoved into a drawer and tried to forget. Old contracts, bank statements, emails I never fully read. I sat at my kitchen table late one night, the room silent, except for the sound of paper sliding against paper. And slowly, the picture became clear. My name wasn't just on one document. It was on almost everything. The liabilities, the guarantees, the responsibilities. My brother's name appeared far less than I had been led to believe. That alone was devastating. But what I found next was worse. There were emails between my mother and people involved in my brother's business. Messages I had never been included in. She had been warned, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Concerns about missing money, questions about false reporting, red flags that couldn't be ignored. And she had seen them all. In one message, someone wrote that my brother's practices could lead to serious legal trouble. They suggested restructuring or stepping away entirely. My mother's reply was short. "He's under a lot of pressure. Please be patient." No mention of me. No concern about whose name was exposed. That was the moment my hands started shaking, because it meant something I had never allowed myself to believe. She didn't make a mistake out of ignorance. She knew. She knew my brother was taking dangerous shortcuts. She knew the risks weren't hypothetical. And instead of stopping him, she redirected the damage toward me. I kept reading. Another message later on made my stomach drop. Someone asked if I understood what I was responsible for. My mother replied, "He trusts me. He won't question it." I stared at those words for a long time because they explained everything. Why she pushed me to sign so quickly. Why she dismissed my questions. Why she was so calm when the notices started arriving. She wasn't surprised. She was prepared to let me carry the consequences, as long as my brother stayed untouched. I confronted her a few days later, not in anger, not yelling. I needed to see her face when the truth was spoken out loud. I told her what I found, the emails, the warnings, the proof that she knew. For the first time in my life, she didn't interrupt me. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, silent eyes, fixed on the floor. Finally, she said something I will never forget. I was trying to protect him. That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just that. I asked her if she ever thought about what would happen to me. She looked up then, truly looked at me. And in that moment, I realized something painful. She hadn't thought about it. Not really. In her mind, I was capable. I would endure. I always had. She said you were stronger, as if strength meant permission to be sacrificed, as if love was measured by fragility. That conversation changed something inside me forever, because the story I had told myself for years, that maybe she hadn't known, that maybe she hadn't understood, was gone. The truth was simple. She saw the danger coming. She chose who would stand in front of it, and it wasn't the child she loved. It was the child she assumed would survive it. Walking away that day, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The pain was still there. The damage was still real. But the confusion was gone. I finally understood my role in her life, and I finally understood why, when everything collapsed, she had turned back to me, not because she trusted me, not because she loved me, but because I was the one who had already paid, and she believed I would pay again. After that conversation, I didn't sleep for days. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally awake. Every memory felt different now. Every moment from my childhood carried a new weight. The favoritism, the pressure, the silence. It all led to this. My mother's health continued to decline. Doctor visits became more frequent. Medications piled up. She didn't talk about the future anymore. Only the present. Only what she needed. And once again, all eyes turned to me. Friends and relatives began reaching out. "She's still your mother," they said. "She did her best." I listened quietly, because they hadn't lived my life. They hadn't signed those papers. They hadn't carried the consequences. I stood at a crossroads. On one side was resentment, walking away, finally saying no. On the other side was familiarity, stepping back into the role I knew too well, the one who fixed things. I asked myself a question I had never allowed myself to ask before. What do I want? Not what is expected, not what is assumed. What do I need to be free? One evening, I sat across from my mother again. She looked tired, smaller than ever. She talked about her fears, about being alone, about not knowing what would happen to her. She never said she was sorry. And somehow, that made my decision clearer. I told her I would help, not with everything, not without boundaries. I would make sure she was safe, that her basic needs were met, but I would not sacrifice myself again. She looked relieved, grateful even, but there was also confusion in her eyes, because this wasn't the help she expected. I wasn't stepping in as her protector. I was stepping in as myself. Later that night, I thought about my brother. Wherever he was, whatever he was doing, he had chosen escape. I had chosen presence, not because I owed her anything, but because I owed myself something better than bitterness. Helping her wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't forgetting. It was an ending to a story where my worth was measured by how much pain I could endure. I made arrangements, handled what needed to be handled, And for the first time, I did it without waiting for approval. Something strange happened as I took control of my own choices. The weight I had carried for years began to lift. Not all at once, but enough for me to breathe again. My mother never fully understood what she had done, and maybe she never will. But I no longer needed her to, because the truth had already done its work. I had seen it, named it, and chosen not to let it define me anymore. In helping her, I wasn't repeating the past. I was closing it. And as I did, I realized something important. The hardest choice isn't walking away. It's staying without losing yourself. That was the choice I made, and it changed everything that came after. Life didn't suddenly become easy after that. There was no dramatic apology, no emotional confession, no moment where everything felt resolved. Instead, things became quiet. My mother settled into a routine. Doctor appointments, short walks, long hours of silence. We spoke politely, carefully, like two people learning how to exist in the same space without reopening old wounds. She never brought up the past, not my childhood, not the papers, not my brother, and I stopped expecting her to, because I finally understood something that had taken me a lifetime to accept. Closure doesn't always come from the person who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from the moment you stop waiting for them to change. I focused on rebuilding my own life, slowly, deliberately. I found work again, not what I had before, but something steadier. I repaired relationships that had been strained by years of stress and silence. Some couldn't be fixed. Others surprised me. The shame I had carried for so long began to loosen its grip, not because the damage disappeared, but because I stopped blaming myself for it. My mother watched all of this from a distance. Occasionally, I caught her looking at me in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not proud, not affectionate. Thoughtful, as if she were seeing me for the first time, after everything she had already done. One afternoon, months later, she said something unexpected. "I didn't think you'd still be here." She didn't say it cruelly or kindly, just honestly. I looked at her and realized that sentence summed up our entire relationship. She never thought I'd leave, and she never thought I'd stay on my own terms. That realization didn't hurt the way it once would have, because I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here because I chose to be. As for my brother, he never came back. No calls, no explanations, just absence. And strangely enough, that absence brought clarity. He had made his choice long ago. And so had my mother. I was the last one to make mine. There's a lie we're often told about family. That love excuses everything. That blood demands sacrifice. That endurance is the same as loyalty. It isn't. Endurance without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Loyalty without honesty becomes betrayal of yourself. I didn't forgive my mother because she asked for it. I didn't help her because she deserved it. I did it because I refused to let her choices define the rest of my life. That distinction matters, because forgiveness, when it comes, should be an act of strength, not surrender. Today, when I look back on everything, I don't see myself as the child who was unloved. I see myself as the person who survived being overlooked without becoming bitter. My mother's biggest mistake wasn't loving the wrong child. It was assuming the one she neglected would never understand his own worth. She was wrong about that. And in the end, that truth mattered more than any apology she could have given. If you're listening to this and see yourself somewhere in my story, if you've been the one who carried the weight quietly, the one who paid the price while others walked away, know this: you are allowed to choose yourself, even if no one ever taught you how. And sometimes the most powerful ending isn't revenge. It's walking forward, lighter than you've ever been before. From a psychological perspective, stories like this are far more common than most people realize. In many families, love isn't distributed evenly. Not because parents are cruel, but because unresolved fear, guilt, or attachment leads them to cling to one child and lean on another. The child who is favored grows up believing the world will protect them. The child who is overlooked grows up believing they must protect everyone else. And that imbalance doesn't disappear with age. It follows them into adulthood, into money decisions, into loyalty, into silence. What makes this story especially painful is not the favoritism itself, but the moment when responsibility is disguised as trust. When someone says you're stronger, what they often mean is you can handle more pain. That is not love. That is avoidance. True healing doesn't begin when the parent finally apologizes, because many never do. Healing begins when the adult child realizes something crucial. You are not required to destroy yourself to prove your worth. You are not obligated to keep paying for mistakes you didn't choose. And forgiveness is not the same as permission to be hurt again. In this story, the most powerful moment wasn't when karma arrived. It wasn't when the favored child disappeared. It was when the overlooked child chose boundaries over bitterness. That choice breaks generational cycles. It says, "This pain ends with me." If this story resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in the silence, the pressure, or the quiet endurance, then this channel exists for you. Here we tell stories not to glorify suffering, but to give meaning to it. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like this video. It helps these stories reach others who may need them more than you realize. And consider subscribing to the channel, not just for more stories, but for perspective reflection and the reminder that you are not alone in what you've lived through. Because sometimes hearing someone else's truth is the first step toward finally honoring your own. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember this: you don't owe anyone your life just because they were part of your past. You owe yourself a future that feels whole.